Hey everybody, Scott here. Today I'm going to show you how to assemble your black bore plugger and install it on your black bore implement lift. Alright, so the black bore plugger. It aerates the ground by removing plugs, allowing for increased airflow, increased water flow, and increased nutrient absorption. I'm going to show you how to assemble yours. Alright, so the plugger comes with a lot of parts. I'm going to try to show you what they all are. We've got our axle, we've got the axle extension, we've got the axle coupling, we've got two bearings, we've got two bearing carriers left and right, we've got our tine mount plate with tines. Each tine mount plate gets 5 tines. There are enough parts for 8 total. I went ahead and put together 7 of them already. I'm going to show you how to put together the 8th one. In between each of the tine mount plates with tines, we've got a whole bunch of spacers, and then of course we've got our U-bolt hardware, which we're going to use to mount the plugger to the black bore implement lift. You're also going to need some tools. You're going to need a 9/16 inch deep socket. You're going to need a 3/4 inch deep socket. You're going to need a 1 1/8 inch socket for your axle nut. If you have a 3/4 inch ratchet wrench, that's going to come in handy as well. First thing we're going to do, we're going to put our tines onto our tine mount plates. Each tine mount plate gets 5 tines. Each tine has a little lip on it. This lip is going to go right here, and that's going to allow you to square up this hole. And inside this hole, you're going to put one of your small carriage bolts through the tine and the tine mount plate. Then you're going to put a washer on there and then a small lock nut. We're just going to put it on there hand tight for right now while we put the tines on. Alright, so after we get our 5 tines onto our tine mount plate with all the washers and the lock nuts in place, they're all going to be pretty loose, and we're going to go ahead and tighten them up. That's where we get our 9/16 inch socket, and we tighten each of these carriage bolts down. Got to make sure that the carriage bolt is lined up with the inside the square of the tine and the tine mount plate. Go ahead and tighten down each of these bolts. Alright, so that's pretty easy. We've got all of our 8 tine mount plates with tines put together. We're going to move these out of the way for right now while we put our bearings into our bearing carriers. The bearing carrier sits on top like that. We're going to take 4 of these large carriage bolts and set them in the holes of the bearing. They're going to go through your bearing carrier. And then we're going to put our lock nuts on there. Again, we'll just do it hand tight for right now. Okay, our last one on there, and then we're going to do the other bearing on the other bearing carrier. Alright, once we get our last lock nut on our bearing carrier, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tighten these down with our 3/4 inch socket. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put all of our pieces onto our axle. But before we do that, we have to orient the tine plates in a way so that the tines come into contact with the ground in a more smoother, gradual way. If you skip this step and all the tines are oriented in the same direction, you'll essentially be pulling a 5-sided wheel across the ground, which will end up being pretty bumpy, and it'll put unnecessary pressure and strain on the tines. So let me show you what we're going to do. On each tine plate, you have one tine that is perfectly aligned with the square axle hole. Now to illustrate that, I'm going to lay all these time plates out and I'm going to mark them with a piece of tape. You don't have to do this. This is just to illustrate my point and also because I'm a bit forgetful. Get all these time plates laid out for you, and I'm going to mark the tine on each of these time plates. I'm going to mark the tine that is perfectly aligned with the square hole in the middle. Okay, so now we have all 8 of our tine plates marked with a piece of tape on the tine that is in line with the square hole in the middle. And basically what we're going to want to do is, as we put the tine plates onto the axle, we want the next tine plate in succession to rotate 90 degrees. So I'm going to do that here to help you see what I'm talking about. We've got 90 degrees or a quarter turn here. We've got 180 degrees or a half turn. And we've got 270 degrees or 3/4 turn. And then we're going to do the same thing with the next 4. If you orient your tine plates in this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it creates kind of a spiral pattern on the plugger as your ATV is pulling the plugger along the ground. It creates a much smoother motion, it's not as bumpy, and it's better for the plugger and tines. All right, so let's get back to the fun part. We're gonna start putting stuff onto our axle now. We're gonna take our axle and we're going to slide on a tine plate. Again, I left the tape on there to illustrate how these tine plates should be oriented. After the first tine plate, you're going to get a long bearing spacer. Then you're going to put your bearing on there. Then your short bearing spacer. It's going to go cap facing up. Then the next tine plate. Again, right now I've got my bottom tine plate, first one, is facing at 0 degrees. I'm going to go a quarter turn with my next tine plate. And then another spacer. My third tine plate is going to go 180 degrees or half turn. The marked tine will be facing towards me. Then a spacer. Then our fourth tine plate, which will be 3/4 turn. Now it's time to connect the axles. We got our axle coupler. Screw that all the way on there. Then we're going to put our axle extension on there. All right, so after we get our axle extension on there, the axle extension is going to have to line up with the axle because we're going to put a spacer on there, and the spacer should be able to slide right on. After the spacer, we're going to put our fifth tine plate on, but we're going to put it facing inward. So these center 2 tines should be facing each other, and each tine plate after that should also be facing inward. I'm going to put another spacer on. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Our last full spacer. Our 7th tine plate is going to go 180 degrees or half turn. Then we're going to get a small capped bearing spacer. We're going to put our bearing on there. Then our large bearing spacer, followed by our 8th and final tine plate. Again, rotating 90 degrees from the previous tine plate. After that final one, we're going to get our last small spacer. We're going to just set this over the axle. Then comes the axle washer and the axle nut. So after you get your your axle nut hand tight, and we're gonna torque this axle nut down to 200 foot-pounds. All right, so after you've got your axle put together, the next thing to do is install the U-bolt so that we can put it on our black bore implement lift. All you're gonna need is your 4 U-bolts. Each U-bolt is gonna get 2 washers and 2 lock nuts. Install it in the top, put a washer on, hold it in place with a lock nut. We're going to repeat that for the other side. Just get them hand tight for now. U-bolt, 2 washers, 2 lock nuts. Repeat this for the other 2 U-bolts on your other side of your plugger. All right, so now that we've got our black bore plugger assembled, all we have to do now is install it onto our black bore implement lift. To do that, we're just gonna take 2 of the U-bolts. I'm gonna go ahead and throw them up on over the implement bar. Once you get it on there, I'm gonna slide it down far enough so that we can get the other 2 U-bolts on there. Once we get those on, we're gonna center up. We're gonna make sure our plugger is center on our implement bar. And then we're gonna start tightening down using our 3/4 inch wrench or ratchet wrench. All right, so there you have it. Black bore plugger is now on your black bore implement lift. Time to go outside and get aerating that lawn. Hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching.
Camco.net.